generally what's the idea behind this program is, and then we'll zoom right into it. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Yinka.
Thank you very, very much, Theodora, and it's a pleasure to join this seminar today. It's for us very important because the AAFA is out to bridge the knowledge gap between, what I would call the Africans in diaspora and Africans um, in the home continent, as well as Africans in other parts of the world. So events like this really help to build that capacity we're looking for. So thank you for organizing this again. And I want to thank Professor Peter Ghattis, who is going to be our speaker for the day, for taking time out to bring us this knowledge. So one of the things, if those of you who are joining us, if this is your first time attending an AAFA event, the AAFA is the Pan-African um, body that helps to facilitate the interchange of research ideas amongst accounting professionals and accounting researchers in the continent. So we do this through different platforms, one of them being this, and the big one is our yearly conference in September. So more information will be coming your way. And you may also have attended some of our Francophone events of similar nature, which caters more to the Francophone community. So the point is there are different ways to connect with us, and please feel free to always join our events and benefit from the knowledge we bring. So I wouldn't waste too much time. This is the first of the series that Theodora will be looking after. So hopefully I would say keep an eye on the space. There'll be more coming, especially from next year. So we want to thank Peter for really um, helping to start this series. And it's a great pleasure, Peter, for you to share today's seminar with us. And I know we've got a very important topic, which I know a lot of people who do qualitative research or even non-qualitative research will need to get great understanding of how context makes a difference in the research we do. For developing countries or what we might call the majority of the world, sometimes researchers believe just because there's nothing done about your country, it's enough for you to seek a contribution. But it could be more than that, and I'm sure Peter will take us through that. So once more, thank you everybody for joining, and it's a great pleasure to have you. I'll pass it back to Theodora.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yinka. Thank you. It's a real privilege. We are very excited to have our maiden edition of the Anglophone version of what the Francophones have done 22 of. But I believe that every start, the important thing of every process is the start, and we've started. And I know that it's going to be a great learning platform for all of us. I am a testament of so much learning that one can glean from AAFE. So I'm hoping that we're able to bring that to the doorsteps of all of us. This evening, I'll just quickly run us through. We would have the main presentation for about 45 minutes. Then we'll open up the floor for some Q&A sessions where you could either put your questions in the chat or on mute and just interact with us. And then we would come back with some closing remarks and summary and announcement from our president, and then we wrap it up. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. We are very privileged to have Professor Peter Ghattis joining us and facilitating this session on making context count, qualitative accounting research in developing countries. Peter is an assistant professor of accounting in the Department of Management at the University of Gulf. He holds a PhD from University of Southampton. He also has an MSc in accounting from University of Central Florida, and he's originally from Egypt, so he's one of us. And currently, Prof. Ghattis' research focuses on accounting professionalization, audit oversight, and the political economy of audit regulation and international standard setting. particularly in developing economies. His work has been published in leading journals, including AAA Geo Accounting, Auditing, and Accountability Journal, Critical Perspectives on Accounting, Accounting Forum, and the Accounting History Journal. You would agree with me that for you to be able to get into this journal with the African context, you should have done something right. This evening, we're happy to have Prof. Peter share with us his own experiences, his journey, what he's learned along the way in his quest to publish in some of these leading journals. Thank you so much, Prof. Peter, for kicking us off in this maiden session. Please, over to you.
Thank you very much for having me. For people who did not attend any of the AFA conferences, this is my absolute conference to attend. Sometimes it's the only conference that I attend. It's just because, not just that it's usually in really nice places, but also the feedback that you get and the way people are really eager to help you. So AFA is by far my favorite conference to attend. Without further ado, I'll start the presentation. A few disclaimers. First, obviously, I'm not by any means, I'm not the best published person in this area. So what I will talk about today is basically my experience, or what I thought, or what I think would make qualitative accounting research in developing countries published. So also another caveats that I need to highlight, or disclaimers, is that it's mainly qualitative. It's not mainly, it is qualitative accounting critical angle. And also I use examples that I am more familiar with related to topics that I'm more interested in: audit regulations, standards, stuff like that. So I'm including in my talk about 6 papers. 2 of them are my own, not to obviously brag about my own, but because I've seen those papers develop, and I've seen basically I lived with the struggles of those papers, so I can see, for example, how from the reviews and the reviewers' comments and replying to the reviews, how they develop into a paper that's published. So also, the goal of the talk is try as much as possible to give you practical advice on how to make your papers, or the context of your paper, publishable. And also, a big caveat: this list is not it's not given. Again, that's my interpretation or my analysis of why papers gets published. So we could disagree with that. We can discuss that in the Q&A. So how what we're gonna do today is basically quickly setting the scene, and then see the 5 features that I see that most of the papers that they get published have those one or no have the majority of those 5 features. We're gonna go through these 6 examples, figuring out what did they do according to those 5 features, and then we will stress or highlight those patterns, and then we will conclude the work. So we start off with 2 papers that talk about how little accounting research in developing countries is published. So there is a paper that's fairly old now. It's from Rahman 2010, and it was a CPA special issue. And obviously, after this special issue, including that special issue, a lot of papers from developing countries in Africa were published. But it's just really interesting to see the numbers. So they basically said from 1990 that it was about 100 there was 9 articles in 650 articles that was published. Obviously, since then things have improved. Also, Moses and Hopper, that was a little bit more recent paper, highlight the same issue. About 9.5% of the papers published in A and 57 A and B ranked journals are in developing countries, and even if you look within those, you find about 74% of are in Asia. China takes 75%. Africa takes alone 6% of that. And the methods are 66% quantitative, so that means the qualitative is even less. And you can see that there is an increase in developing countries, but definitely an improvement in terms of numbers, but they don't represent the total. In the percentage does not represent a big percentage for the total number that was published. So there's an interesting quote that we're basically a lot of the knowledge from Africa and the Indian subcontinent is usually ignored. And what's interesting about this knowledge that we're talking about 85% of the world population. So there's a lot of knowledge there that's not talked about. And even though that those countries, those developing countries, have very interesting context, and there's a lot of the accounting effects or the accounting practices can show in an extreme form. So, for example, there's in those countries there's usually colonial or post-colonial legacies. IMF programs can also highlight that there's interesting, the accounting can shed an interesting light on. There's state capture of regulation, state power there. There's corruption. There's rapid informal to formal transition. There's also the whole part of the SDG struggles. That's also those countries can provide a lens, an angle on. So, point is that there's a lot of extreme and interesting contexts in those countries that is often overlooked. So, what the question is, so the papers that got published, why did they get published? So, from my experience reading papers on qualitative accounting from this area, I find that usually they have a combination of not one. Usually, you're probably not going to get away with only one. You probably have to have a few combination of those. So the main ones that I found is that they usually exploit an extreme or a revealing institutional setting. They usually make a genuine theoretical contribution or an extension of that theory. There is, in the words of Professor Lassou, they usually tell an under-researched story that deserves to be told, and they implicitly or explicitly combat some epistemic injustice, and they're methodologically well designed and executed. So this is what I made them in a shape of a pyramid. My Egyptian roots affect me here, and I will try to go over papers. There's a lot of examples that we can pass them through those five features, but I chose six today. Again, two of them are my own, just because I knew how they chronologically developed, and we will try to run them by those five features. So, before we start on the five features, what is not to do? So, first, the idea of the country, this research or is not done, has never been in this country in particular, and this country over just another case or some kind of an exotic setting is not enough to publish the paper. I remember during my PhD, I was in some workshop in Sheffield, if I remember correctly, and there was a PhD student that was presenting their work, and their argument was, when they were asked about what is the contribution, their argument was that this research was never done in, I think it was Saudi, I think. And the presenter or the discussant gave a lengthy speech about that just replicating a study based only on a context does not really give a contribution, because it does not answer the question of why the global reader care. So if you just change that this has happened in Zimbabwe, but this is how it would take place in Zambia, there would obviously be a little bit of difference, because no two countries are exactly the same. But relying on this alone does not does not answer the question of why would the global reader care to read that. And also, the paper is not going to succeed by just saying, well, they're going to care by knowing how it would work in this country versus in this country. So again, if we're relying only on descriptively telling a story, this does not answer the more major question, or the more major issue that a paper should answer, which is the last point, is that this paper should change the way we think about the topic or that issue. So if this is the context is apply in different country, and then it can offer a different way to think about it, meaning that we can extend the theory, or we can think about some phenomena in a different way that could justify the concept. But just telling the story in a different, it's almost like recreating a play or recreating a movie just with different actors, is not enough to make a contribution. So that's what not to do. So the people, the papers that got away, what did they do? So the first paper we're using here is an essay in 2000 in AOS. So the setting is interesting. It's talk about the accountants in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'll give a brief background, and then we talk about the theory, talk about the key findings, and maybe one or two quotes, and then run it through the five features, and I will do that for the six papers. So in this one, the context is that from 1962, basically the independence of Trinidad and Tobago, until 2000, most of the accountants are ACCA qualified. So there is a local institution, there is a local accounting institution. It exists, but it's powerless. So every attempt to have a genuine local qualification have failed. So the question is, why in countries that also had British rule, like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, broke free from the British qualification, while Trinidad and Tobago did not? So that's the background. That's an interesting context, and they also obviously follow a long time to answer this question. So the theory is a combination of two theoretical frameworks. So the first one, Johnson 1982, it talks about professional bodies as act as imperial bodies, are basically tools in which the empire export the standards and manage their colonies. And then also another theory, Galting, I think I'm pronouncing it wrong, a structural theory of imperialism, which talks about in the UK or in the colonies, instead there is a center and a periphery, and then in the periphery there is two groups. There is what they call bridgehead elites, so local whites or foreign trained brown, which is their interests are more aligned with the center, while the majority, the Afro and Indo Trinidads, where their interests are conflicting with the center. And then it goes in and talks about that the bridge has more, the bridge has elites, has zero incentives to break from the center. And they use the ACCA to give them privileges and mobility and exercise more power over the majority. So here they were talking about the imperialism is sustained not only by external force, but interlocking the interest of the metropolitan with the elite heads or the bridge heads. What in this case, what Galting calls the internal logic of imperialism. Um, so the key finding is that every single attempt that they try to create a local qualifications or try to de-link from the ACCA was sabotaged by local elites. And the local accounting association is deliberately dependent on the ACCA. And the result is that virtually every, until 2000, virtually every practicing, or like most, I would say virtually every is a little bit more strong, are ACCA qualified. And there's an interesting quote that says, "To this day, the accountancy profession in Trinidad and Tobago remains firm in the grip in its formal colonial master." And what this paper did is, other than exploit and revealing an extreme setting, so Trinidad and Tobago, a good example of non-settler colonies. So this paper also, after that paper, the professional accounting professional literature started, or others also use that. Paulus and Uchi also use the same settler non-settler distinction. But this paper highlighted that and also showed that independence in terms of the profession is not just by when the country gets independence. There's effects or residues that comes out of that. So the context here is very much utilized, and it reveals a really interesting case. Another interesting thing that the paper done in terms of theory. They used the structure empiricism in accounting. They put it into the context of accounting, and they created the settler non-settler distincting, which is again now most of the accounting professionalization literature that talks about this distinction use the settler non-settler distinction. Obviously, it's an under-researched. I'm not really sure that there was a lot of Caribbean accounting papers before that paper that described how it works before that paper. And implicitly, obviously, Marcia is from Trinidad, and it combats the epistemic injustice that happened in this context. The methodological approach was archival. If you look at the method section in this paper, there's an extensive use of documents, letters, newspapers, archival documents going through many years, letters, many years. So it was such a huge project that was taken, and the data is pretty rich. So again, we can discuss, maybe we'll move it back to the at the end of the talk about which of the 5 features you can really see more, but those 5 features in this paper definitely exist. So that's the first paper that we've looked at. And then the second paper is Agrezi 2021 and also an accounting AOS. And this was really interesting. So this one talks about space and accounting. So the female segregation in Saudi Big Four in Saudi Arabia, the Big Four firms in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi provides this is the setting. Saudi provides an interesting case where the law requires in workplaces that the women are segregated, physically segregated, and women are restricted, not encouraged to do a lot of the clients' visits. I think now with the changes that might have been not the case now, but I know that probably the rule of a separate place might have still exist. But yeah, again, Saudi is going through so much changes, so so a lot of those things might not apply now. But until now, I'm not sure that the law has changed. I don't think so. So the theory is also really interesting because the use of it in accounting is very novel. So the theory is talking about the production of space. They're talking about a conceived space. That's how the space is designed or regulated by the planner. And then the perceived space. So how do you actually use the space in routines and the movement? And then how the lived space or how the occupants subjectively experience and interpret space. So what they did in this paper is this not invented, but like at least name it as the gendered space. So it's almost a deliberate fragmentation and the forced homogenization of the space that turns women into a controlled and invisible labor because they put them in their own cubicles. So the core finding of the spatial paper is that shows how spatial design, the cubicles in this case in the Big Four audit firms, becomes a central mechanism through which patriarchal control and gender exclusion are enacted in Saudi firms. And then one interesting quote about that is that the discourses and the codification of the female-only sections, as well-intentioned locale of domination and control of female labor conceived by the state and the firm management. So again, it's a leading paper that shows that physical space, which was I found brilliant when this paper I knew about this paper, that the physical space is used as gender oppression in accounting. So if we also look at the 5 features, I don't need to talk about extreme or revealing settings. So again, one of the most extreme gender segregations applied in the global Big Four. Hard to find a stronger naturally laboratory for that. Using the theory, so we're talking about space and then apply it into accounting and talking about the gender space. Also, it's a under research story that deserve to be told. So it's a deep look on how Big Four firms in Arab countries, particularly Saudi, and giving it words in AOS. Abir Saloom, who was doing the PhD same as me in the same time, Saudi, and talking about that issue, fights and epistemic, maybe fighting epistemic injustice. From what I remember, she talks about 42 interviews across 3 sites. There's personal office visits. There's photos of the layout. So the methodological here is pretty strong. So that's the second paper that we look at, again through those 5 features or points. The third one is Unin and Hopper, 2001 AOS. So this one talks about or takes us through a journey of one factory in Bangladesh, soap factory, and sorry, oops, just give me 1 second. Okay, I did something wrong.
Can still
Oh,
see. Me hear you.
yeah, I just changed the view, so I messed it up for myself. Oh, just 1 second. Okay, yeah, we're back. So yeah, it talks about Bangladesh soap factory and talks us through 30 years through nationalization, political chaos, privatization, and then despotic sweatshop. So the theory is Borroway, politics of production. So it's talking about the consent versus the corrosion, and they talk about different key elements on the labor process, internal labor markets. That's how people are promoted. Basically the political or the job ladder, internal state games, how the political unions organize the labor collective agreements, stuff like that, and then games, the manipulation of like time cards and stuff like that. So this is the 3 mechanism of control, and then what they did here in the paper is that they show how the idealized hegemonic regime, which is basically how the after nationalization they take those centralized planning tools, formal accounting, the recognized unions, and then they, through a political process, they take it as they manufacture consent with it. So basically, keep the hegemony, keep the control, but more in an organized or what seems like an organized matter. So key findings is that at the start of after the nationalization, the government tried to create a hegemonic regime. So there's a particular accounting system, there is a welfare scheme, there's labor unions, but then in reality, labor unions or labor unions, the heads of the people unions are also have political roles, so they become an extension of a political party, and then the promotion and wages and even the super production becomes more of a tools affected by politics. And then accounting systems here remain extremely detailed, but it's more of a stylistic. It doesn't really take or does not is applied on the ground. But it's done, but it does not have the effect as the idealized, what they call the idealized system, what they imported from the West. And then it shifts to the privatization, where the new owners come in and then cancel all of those guard plays that was ritualistic in the first place, and then they start to do more coercion. So the paper talks about that if one of the workers tried to have another job outside of that area, they would be threatened by jail. They were threatened to be removed from the on-site boarding. So they basically the hegemony or the control through privatization takes a different form, and then the budget suddenly becomes a coercive weapon. and basically the reinventing of the coercion, but through politicized or manufactured consent. So impact, it adds political hegemony to the labor process, shows that privatization in developing countries, I would say rather than poor countries, can make things worse for the workers, not the better. So again, if we pass it through the five features that we talked about, so it's a very revealing setting. So multi-decade trajectory of the same soap factory moves from colonial private ownership to state-owned to nationalization state-owned to privatization by a family-owned privatization. They extended the politics of production theory. They introduced to accounting, and then they introduced the political despotism in after privatization. Without goes without saying, it both an under research story that deserves to be told and also combats epistemic judgment. What's really interesting for that is the methodology, methodological depth. So the one of the authors spent 7 months of field work and did about 74 interviews. Again, with complemented with extensive document and archival analysis. So pretty rich data there. And then the fourth example is one of the I found a really interesting theory. So they take it from Gramsci, 1971 hegemony. So it's basically follows a tea plantation in Sri Lanka, I think. Yeah. It's so 11 months. And the theory talks about that there's a structural hegemony, so that's the structure of the political of the society. So that would be the colonial history, how this how the country's histories came about, and then the agential hegemony, which is the individual leaders and the superintendents, the union bosses who personally reproduce the system. What they did in this paper, which they extended, is that they did the structure and then the agental and then the everyday practices, and they linked them together. So basically, they followed the tea plantations thinking of, okay, there's a structure that was set, and then how this structure is kept and how is reinvented by the everyday practices. So basically, what they found is that yes, there might be some kind of a system that is set in place, but this system is not applied. There's a more deeply rooted system where the superintendent or the union boss are the ones that they, even though that they have a official or an accounting system that's in place, they reproduce the system themselves through rituals that might be outside of the system. So here, political hegemony is in which boundaries between companies and the states and civil society are completely disappear. And then accounting here represents and reproduces an already existing political system. It just quantifies the natural daily of plucking the weights, recording them, presenting them as objective truth. So basically, using the umbrella of the system and recreating the hegemony. And one of the interesting quotes here is that accounting does not constitute the labor process. It merely provides a calculated re-representation of the hegemony that's already constituted by other means. So again, Sri Lankan tea plantation. So interesting ex-colonial setting where enterprise and the state have fused for about 150 years. The original Gramsci, which is the Italian prisoner that wrote, I think the original theory is from that Italian prisoner that talk about political hegemony and how the structure they create consent. So they took that, applied it in accounting, and split it into three dimensions: the structural and agental, and then the everyday. Again, under research story, check epistemic justice, and then the methodologies. They did 11 months of field work, numerous interviews and observation, and extensive use of secondary and historical data. So that's the fourth one. The fifth and the sixth ones are my own papers. So I will take a little bit time to talk about the setting and then the theory, because I remember how the theory was iterated. So for that one, Ghattis, that I made it with my supervisor, Steven and Oliver Marnet. And this one was published in CPA Critical Perspective in Accounting in 2021. So it's about the development of the Egyptian profession. The setting was that through 70 years, the accounting professional in Egypt did not change. The accounting law did not change. So it was enacted in 1951 as an anti-colonial law. So during that time, we had the Brits as uh, they basically had Egypt was a protector of the British, and most of the accountants were British. There was some Egyptians, and then we had one government under British rule that was Egyptian and more Egyptian nationalist. And then they put that rule that in order to be an accountant, you have to be Egyptians. You have to have the Egyptian nationality. And that rule until 1951, until now, it did not change until now. So this paper is about 4 years old. Until now, the rule has not changed. So why this was that context was interesting. So in most of the professionalization papers, you find that it's normal that you would have a law or it's normal that you will have the accountants are from the colonizer country, but it's real that you have a law that was done during the British rule that was in a bit anti-colonial. But this in itself was not enough. As you can see in the paper, what we try to see is that how this law um, evolved, or how the profession evolved with that law during different political eras in Egypt. So the theory is new Weberian professional closure. So basically, the idea is that if when you have a profession, there's a group that controls that profession, and then there is a group that wants to get in, and the dominant group exclude them. Sometimes they would manage the inferior group would manage to go and have a position within the dominant group. And rare circumstances there would be some kind of usurpery, which is that the group that was excluded comes in, takes the profession, and kicks the old guards out. So what we try to do here is that using the same law, we would see what they do as a selective market closure, where the law is tweaked a bit in order to include and exclude people depending on the political mood of the state, or depending on the political regime that is prevalent at that time. So without getting too much to paper, because it's my paper, so I'll probably can talk a little bit more about that. So we see from 1946 to 1952, that's the late colonial era, the early independence. So you had a system that was built on the Brits, and then that laws comes in, and then basically because it puts the idea of that you need to be an Egyptian, it changes the composition of accountants very dramatically. So suddenly you have to be Egyptian, so the Brits are kicked out. And then during nationalization, the law was based, or one of the key points of the law is the Egyptian, let's call it the Egyptian CPA, the ECCA, which is supposedly to be as a British modeled profession based on a professional association. Nationalization didn't really like that. It was all done by the government. So they temporarily dissolved it, and then they created their own government-owned syndicate for the profession. So that also keeping the same law, highlighting that you need to be Egyptian. Also using the same law when the Egypt transferred into a more open market. They rebuilt the ACCA, kept those two organizations side by side. The old, let's call it the Egyptian CPA, was reinstated, and also they kept the current syndicate, and the state managed to have those two parallels. And then in the later period, when they realized that one of the routes that they created is producing very much unqualified accountants also using the same law, they created a market authority, the financial market authority, which through that market authority, they would give an additional license to audit listed companies to a particular type of people. So the idea is, which I want to highlight, that the context itself of just having following a profession for 70 years, which is going to be a different story than other countries, was not enough. Through the iterations of the paper, we had to find, not just using the same theory, but also extending the theory, what would help us to make that story not a more interesting story, but what can it tell us about the accounting professionalization is developing country. So what we did that is that to tell us that you don't always have to follow the colonial past that you had. Sometimes the heavy hand of the state steers the profession using the same anti-colonial law that usually are hindering the profession. They continue to hinder. They free the profession obviously for a little bit of time, but they continue to be a tool to continue the instead of the colonial power, now the government power using the same tool. So through different iterations on I think what really sets it apart was when we proposed that selective exclusion part of the theory. So the key code that I would highlight with that is the Egyptian case illustrates form of state-engineered selective market closures that secures the interest of an elite segment of the profession while maintaining the appearance of openness. So again, the interesting or the revealing setting was just a long time, 70 years of the profession through different different political regimes. So you have revolution, socialism, liberalization. We've covered all of that. Also, the addition or the extension to the Weberian professional closures theory. So that was also an extension to the theory. Under research story, there was papers that talked about the Egyptian professions, but not from a historical perspective. So here we're showing that how international best practice sometimes often means elite capture, and to re-explain that part, we really have to talk about the composition within the Egyptian professional association, the Egyptian CPA, which is mainly one of the big four. For the methodological depths, we have done 32 interviews, and we had to read a lot of the laws, a lot of the World Bank reports on the profession in Egypt and how it developed. So there was a mix between the documents and the interviews. For the last paper, so this paper talks about the audit oversight in Egypt. So again, one of the things that made that context interesting is that there is not a lot of papers in developing countries on the audit oversight and the units that do the oversight. Also, one interesting context that we exploited here is how they did the oversight, which was interesting to this particular unit because they were really understaffed. There was 3 people in this unit, and they relied heavily on checklists and manuals, which later on, as we will see, disproportionately affected the smaller firms. And also, I think what really helped that paper is the choice of theory. So the sheer theory there's a French book called Society of the Spectral, Guy Debord, 1964. So basically, this book explains, explains social media and Instagram very well, even though that it was published in 1964. So the idea is that the people are focusing on the image more than the reality. And the effort that was put to create the image is more than the effort that people would put in creating the reality. Again, whenever I try to explain that theory, I was like, look at what people do for social media now. You perfectly understand that theory. So this theory was taken into management, not into accounting, and slightly were tied to management or accounting or audit, where for one particular reference, Flavorborn, I think, when they talked about what they call mega spectacles, which was the idea of that when there's a scandal that happens, is a really important the really important event that puts the eye on the issue. So usually it's followed by some kind of a regulation, and that's the mega spectacle, and then things die down. So what we did and how we extend that theory is what we offered is an extension called performative spectacle. Is that you try to create the image, but then sometimes when you are replicating the image, when you are doing it in different places, it's not always the same. So the idea of someone makes a movie in the US and then some knockoff movie in a different country takes that movie, when they are doing it in their own language, in their own setting, they change a bit of it, but still is a movie. So how does that appear in our paper? So basically, what we looked at is that when the Egyptians did the audit oversight, they modeled it on the PCAOB, but they only took the image. They only took a bunch of checklists. They only took a bunch of templates, and then they recreated it in an Egyptian way. So the end result is that the oversight unit and how they would do their compliance reviews is that you satisfy a particular checklist that was modeled on the American best practice movie. So when it was done in the Egyptian context, you would find that the big four would easily can check the box because they have those templates and they have those requirements in their firms. But when you have to apply it to a smaller firm, when they don't really have all of those requirements, not necessarily of the lack of quality, it's just not a big firm, they would be flagged and excluded and sometimes not allowed to audit listed companies just because they did not meet the list that was recreated based on the image of the American PCAOB. So for that one, we're basically highlighting that regulatory oversight is symbolic and performative, relying on templates. Um, uh, Focus on visibility and document compliance is not actually on actual audit quality. Smaller firms are forced to mimic for Big Four style documentation. So, for example, some of the firms that we talked to that passed the compliance for you, basically they would copying some of the documents and the policies from Big Four firms. And then quality becomes more defined by capacity to comply to international style reforms, which is the PCAOB. And then the AOU, which is the Accounting Oversight Unit in Egypt, adopts PCAOB inspired frameworks. And then the interesting quote here is that the audit oversight regimes create a theater of accountability, producing an illusion of reform that obstructs international and real institutional weakness. So again, the revealing setting here is that we're looking at a developing countries oversight unit, which is usually not a lot of papers on that. I do think that what helped that paper is that the spectacle theory was not really used in accounting much, and then we brought it into an accounting context in a developing countries, and we offered an extension, that performative spectacle. It's a under-researched story that deserves to be told. Wouldn't go that much saying that it combats a huge epistemic injustice. The methodology depth, we looked at the checklists that they offer. We did a lot of different interviews from the regulators, Big Fours, had academics, the ESA board and the EFSA government here represents the EFSA, the regulator. So this is the last example to this. I would just talk about one last one that was actually pretty challenging to publish. So this one, I was faced by the same thing that I'm trying to talk about, which is why the context is different. So this one is talking about the auditing standards and that the Big Four basically interfere in the translation and the issuance of auditing standards in developing country. And a lot of the time, and we used a regulatory space theory, we used the regulatory capture theory, and to that we had a hard time. It's finally published, but we had a hard time justifying why this context is different. And through the change of theory, and then we settled on institutional void, the idea of external partners in this case is the Big Four come in and they try to fill the institutional void in developing countries. Developing countries institutions are weak, so the foreign entity or the foreign big four, let's say, they come in and try to fill that void. But in the Egyptian case, we found that they selectively do that. They do that for the accounting standards, which is again show them that they're well equipped to serve the need of the clients in Egypt. While they don't do that, they don't help with the auditing standards, because helping with the auditing standards means updating the auditing standards, which require them to have more, which adds more requirements to them. So for that one, the context itself was not really helpful, because again, that's a different story of big four interference in developing countries. It was only through the multiple changes of the theory that we were able to say, like, okay, but if you look at through that theory, it might offer um, a different story that might help the reader. Again, back to that particular point. Um, so when we change the theory, it helps us to answer this last question, which is that people would think about the interference or the institutional void in developing countries differently, saying that it's not always that they completely fill the gap of the weak institutions in the host country. They do that selectively if it meets their needs. So that's the 6 examples very quickly. And again, going back to the pyramid, uh, I don't think that this is an all-inclusive list, or I don't think that even some of the papers might get published without having, particularly, for example, combat an epistemic injustice. But I think those are the factors that I see consistently in papers that are published. I try to go as quickly as possible to leave as much time as possible for the Q&A. To that, yeah, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Prof. Peter. Thank you. Do we have any questions we could unmute and then ask, or you could put it in the chat? Any questions, or just also sharing some of your own experiences as well, on how that journey has been? I was actually, Sazani, I see your comment, but I was actually also going to ask you which of these elements, as Prof has spoken about, usually stands out to you also, as you've also been on this qualitative journey. I don't know if you have a chance to just comment briefly before you run, but.
I think she might have already run.
Run. Okay, that's fine. Please, anybody, questions, comments? I see Prof. Steven also in the audience. Any thoughts or ideas?
I mean,
Oh,
can you hear me?
yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm in the train, so that may not help too much. So apologies for that. Thank you, Peter. Very nice sort of synthesis, I think, of these different elements. I think it's nice to maybe I don't know if the editor of AAFG is in the room. Maybe something nice to write about, perhaps as a sort of what makes it, what makes it distinctive. What could make things distinctive. Uh, I think that's a nice way of setting out. Perhaps there could be others. There could be other things. I'm not necessarily immediately reacting about what other things would make it. I suppose an idea of challenging epistemic injustice, maybe also around what impact it might have, who might be interested about it. Reaching out to audiences that perhaps, reaching out to non-traditional type of, not reaching out to upwards type thing, but also reaching out to how does it impact at the lower end, at the lower level of the of a context in which you're looking at. So maybe that's another. So in a way, by epistemic, by challenging sort of epistemic, you're sort of trying to reach out to the unspoken, the stuff that is perhaps less emphasized. But that's just a thought. Yeah, I'll leave it to others.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's good. What I actually saw that was quite interesting for me was that you realize that it's not just the context, but your ability to draw out the uniqueness and the nuances that exist, and using a good theoretical framework to be able to draw out those nuances in a way that adds to knowledge. And I think that if you are, that's a hard thing, but if you are able to go through the process and actually do it, then that would be what will set the paper apart. I think those were my insights from some of the discussions and the papers that you used as examples. Please, any questions, comments? We have a very quiet audience, but any questions, comments, what your own experiences have been around the issue of context in qualitative research and trying to get your paper published. Please, Jerry, please feel free to go. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah. So thank you so much for the presentation. Actually, I'm a newbie when it comes to qualitative research. So somehow I was dumbfounded while he was presenting. So my thought, why I actually joined the meeting, I was thinking it's going to be a kind of step by step how to be able to use qualitative research in development accounting. But when I look at it again, I saw he was talking about using published example really. So I thought maybe I could have some kind of practical strategies how we can be able to use that. So somehow I appreciated the presentation, but I was hoping to have say, okay, if you want to do qualitative research, do this, pick this, do it this way. That could have enhanced my. But I'm a newbie, but I can see that Teves and you have catch up because you are used to that. I'm not used to that, so maybe this is not the right problem for me. Maybe for today, maybe. But I'll keep watching to enhance my skills towards qualitative research. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'd allow Prof. Peter to come in and maybe say a little bit as to what you just said. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I didn't get to. So your question is about you're new to the qualitative realm, and
Yeah.
can you repeat your question?
Okay, yeah. So when I saw the flyer, I was quite inquisitive because I'm new to qualitative research. So my thinking, I didn't see using published examples. I thought that we'll be having some kind of practical strategies on how to use qualitative research to solve problems. So that was my expectation really. But you presented very well. I was dumbfounded because I'm not used to it. So. So I was hoping if there could be some few tips, how if I want to do a qualitative research, I want to do some interviews, I want to identify gaps. So what do I do? How do I get that it could be at the confine of publishing the papers in the right journal houses? That's what I was having in my mind actually. But when I went through the synopsis, the overview, it was clear to me. Yeah. Thank you.
So let's start.
Maybe what you can do is that what would be one of the greatest advice that you give somebody like Jerry who is new to the qualitative space?
Fantastic.
Getting their
Okay,
papers.
so if you're interested, so in quantitative research, you find relationships. You run the regressions and find relationships. If there is a particular question that you need to answer the why to. So why is this happening? And people gives you very interesting whys that this happens. So if there's a question or there's an area that you are really interesting to find the answer to why, that would be a good start. Because people through interviews can tell you a lot of the things that might not be able to see through relationships and regressions and causal relationships. So
Right.
I guess that starts with if you're interested in a particular why does I'm not sure about your area, but why does that something work or does not work? That would be a good start from that, and usually then continue on either through my favorite method is for the why is that you would probably have to analyze some documents to understand what was the structure first, and then interview some people to tell you what's the background of those particular structures. So I guess the start of your qualitative journey to be interested in a problem, understanding why this the why behind this problem.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one thing I would also add as an emerging scholar like you, I don't know if I still should call myself that when I was also entering into the qualitative space, especially because you've had a lot more of the quant background, is just being a bit more inquisitive about theories and actually reading a little bit more about diverse theories and different underpinnings between different things. And
Okay.
once you do that, I realize that it opens up your mind a little bit that when you are looking at some of the whys, you could see very subtle underpinnings of some of these theoretical things that we're talking about, right, come to bear. And that's where you're able to use the theoretical parts because you know it when you look at the context and the way the different things are playing out. Prof. Steven, I don't know, I saw that you put on your camera. I'm not sure if you wanted to also comment as an advice for someone who is new in the qualitative space as they begin their journey. Prof. Yinka, in any of us, right? If there's anything that any of
I
us,
think I, I think can you hear me?
yes, please, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, sure.
very,
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Yeah, I think it's good question about. I mean, how did I start? I mean, I think we all, in a way, the quantitative. You're always trying to understand why, you know, or sometimes the results don't come out at all. And the way I often started this was around telling the story as I see it. So you start almost by sometimes I tell people, tell me the story, write the story. What is going on? What is happening? Almost descriptively, almost as if you're writing a book or you're writing a narrative. And then gradually take that away. So for example, corporate governance isn't working. Okay. So tell me the story of where do you see this happening? What do you observe? In this company, this is happening. In this company, this is happening. Or I see other things happening. So you sort of almost start in a much more narrative sense. So there is a bit of a narrator, kind of a documentary. So how does a documentary work? So that helped me a lot, I think, at the beginning. It's like more in that way. May not work for you, but I know that. But I'm kind
yeah,
of thinking how do we start?
thank you. Jerry, I hope some of these things help as well. But I think when we share the survey, right, it's also a good point to also note some of the topics that people will be interested in getting a little bit more insight into as we plan more activities over the next year. Please, any questions, comments, feedback?
Yeah, I can see one question about from John. So the links, it's this paper is so basically the ISA paper is one paper, and I sent you the link, and then it says using qualitative journey with more than 30 degrees or 30 interviews, don't you think the degree of abstraction is high? So sample size usually does not equal level of abstraction. So, I mean, you can do about 10 interviews and build a quite abstract categories, and then 60 and be very descriptive. Also, we're talking about a particular phenomena in a particular context. Like, for example, it was one of the papers was about that's incoming paper was about a particular law that failed, and we're talking about why it's failed. So the people in the room were 5 people. I interviewed 4 of them. So sometimes it's a limit. People who actually knows the know-how is within a small group of people. And usually, actually, 20, 40 interviews is about medium range, I would think, to most qualitative research. Yeah.
Okay. Any comment about the numbers for anybody? Okay. Questions, comments, anything? Okay, so Prophet, I'm going to ask you a question, right?
Mm.
Was there any time in your journey, or were there certain papers that you've had to give up on because you could not really show the uniqueness of the context? And how have you dealt with some of those things over time as you've
So the
sought?
last paper, the last paper that I posted the link to, it was this. So again, the idea is that Big Four interfere all the time. So how would we make how again the and it kept getting rejected, change theory up and down. So for that one, until we really found the idea of that, well, they do interfere, but they interfere differently in accounting versus auditing standards. And through, again, what you said to one point, where through the changing of the theory from just a fight around regulation, regulatory capture, regulatory space, to the idea of an institutional void, only through that theory and through that nuances that we were able to convince the reviewers, and it was published. But there, again, this one, because again, the idea of Big Four interfering in the developing countries is not new. So the context was like, okay, we knew that. And even if you tell me that this is just an auditing standard, like what does that tell me about how does that would change my thinking about accounting or auditing standards? And only through the theory where we're able to convince, well, they interfere, or they fill the institutional void selectively when it fits their needs. And when we were able to show that, this is where the reviewers said, okay, it does help us see the interference and how the Big Four affect the auditing regulations in developing countries differently. So yeah, definitely the last one took about, I don't know, yeah, lots of time.
Thank you. Okay. I see in the chat that one of our French participants asked for
You're saying a French.
Right.
There's a French person
So
in the room. Is that right?
yes, please.
Is that Crépin? Crépin, tu nous
Yeah,
entends?
it's Crépin. Bonsoir,
Crépin,
Crépin.
bonsoir. So, dis-moi la question que tu as.
So his question is just a quick summary of some of the things that maybe Peter has spoken about, just a nice synthesis of it. That's it in French.
Peter, can you just put up your slide about your 5 things?
Sure.
I'll try to be as quickly as I can and not bother the others. Crépin, you really need to get into English, my friend.
No, and I think maybe the next time we would also try and get a French person also on to do the synthesis as well. So well noted, Crépin.
So where's your, okay, here's the slide. Can you put the 5 stuff? I think Crépin, le point fondamental, c'est qu'il y a 5 dimensions qui font qu'une recherche qualitative puisse être publiée. Donc, les 5 éléments sont là. Par exemple, tu as toujours un élément, toujours il y a une extrémité, quelque chose de particulier, quelque chose euh, qui n'arrive pas souvent, d'un peu surprenant. Donc, il y a toujours un élément surprenant. Deuxième, il faut pouvoir connecter cet élément surprenant avec un cadre théorique. Donc, tu peux faire donc un développement théorique. Ça peut, par exemple, si je prends un exemple, tu peux dire que, bon, tu trouves un cas où la théorie de l'agence ne s'applique pas. On s'attend à un certain comportement, mais ça n'arrive pas. Pourquoi? Donc là, tu pousses l'arrêt ta théorie. Tu as aussi en même temps, en troisième, c'est toujours quelque chose qui est sur un élément qui n'est pas très connu, mais qui doit être, euh, qui doit être dit. C'est-à-dire, c'est souvent peut-être quelque chose où les gens qui sont souvent oppressés n'arrivent pas à parler, et ainsi de suite. Donc, c'est ça qui fait ça important. Le quatrième élément, c'est surtout cet effet de l'injustice épistémique, c'est-à-dire de donner la voix à des gens qui n'arrivent pas à s'exprimer, à des gens qui sont oppressés. Et finalement, bien sûr, il faut que ce soit extrêmement bien, méthodologiquement bien désigné, bien mis en place. Et tu as suffisamment de données, tu as analysé les données d'une façon rigoureuse. Voilà les 5 choses que Peter en a parlé aujourd'hui. Voilà, je m'arrête là. I'll stop here, Theodore.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's what I
Thank you.
wanted to summarize.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Merci. I think, Prof. Peter, maybe we will end on this last question that Jean Roger has, which is what are the research areas in sponsor auditing for African researchers? Oh,
I'm not sure what you mean by sponsor auditing. Can you elaborate on
Jean,
that?
can you? Yeah. Maybe generally, can we, if there are any comments on the research areas in auditing or auditing in Africa that people could look at?
Um, so the two areas, one area that I found really under-researched is the basically auditing the audit, auditing oversight. So accounting professionalization, it's well researched. There's more obviously in different contexts that might be interesting, probably in francophone that I haven't read a lot on the accounting or the auditing professionalization, but definitely one really under-researched area is the oversight. So how auditors, the quality control on audit firms, the oversight from regulators on audit firms, that's definitely, I haven't read a lot of work on that in Africa.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, so at this time, we would invite Prof. Yinka again to give us some closing remarks, summaries, announcements, AAFA event. But I would like to remind us that in the chat is a small, very short, it doesn't even take 5 minutes survey, just to be able to help us. Just as we said, this is our maiden event to make this event more relevant and impactful for researchers on the continent and beyond. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Theodore, and I really want to thank you, Peter. It's been very enlightening, and thank you for your time. Thank you, Steven, as well, for your contribution and engagement. I think the lessons we've learned also is going forward, we might, like Theodora say, give opportunity for translation. But at least we've got two parallel of the same thing, so something we can think about, but it's a good insight to get to know. But I just want to thank everybody. Uh, our first call for paper for the African Accounting and Finance Conference is out. Theodore, I don't know if you can please put that in the chat.
Well
Um,
noted.
and you can always, maybe another good thing to do is just to follow our LinkedIn handle. You will see we post upcoming events, including webinars and seminars like this ones, or any other thing that we believe is of interest to our membership. So I just want to thank everybody for attending, and we look forward to other future engagement with everybody. Thank you so much, Peter. It's been absolute pleasure having you. And thank you, Todora, for what you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Once again, I'm happy we are on time. Thank you so much. Please take a few minutes. We have just about 5 minutes on the clock and fill out the survey. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Prof. Peter. It's been a lot of back and forth, but we've learned a lot. Thank you so much for kickstarting us. And I know that there's many more great days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for your effort, Taylor. Thank you.
Everybody, have a wonderful rest of the day,
Bye-bye,
wherever
everyone.
in the world you are. Bye. Bonsoir, Crepe.